Ever since the beginning, Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl Overused has been one of the more overlooked vanilla formats that you can encounter while on Pokemon Showdown. Now, this has come due to a variety of reasons, one of which has been how the original games, Pokemon BDSP, has been received in terms of criticism by its own fans. And the reason why so many people were disappointed with Pokemon BDSP as games were due to how faithful they were as remakes towards Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. Now, I'm not going to be here to try and discuss whether or not that in itself is the case. That's not what this video essay is going to be all about. But that did impact the development of BDSP OU quite a bit, and that's not telling the whole story. I will be the first to admit that. But that gets me into my point of BDSP OU as a metagame. Now, many people from the outside looking in on this metagame will notice how the roster itself is very similar to that of DPP. Now, granted, there are some bans in place for BDSP that are not implemented for DPP, and henceforth, DPP has some bans that are not implemented in BDSP. But overall, for the most part, the selection of mons available for BDSP and DPP are, for the most part, the same. Probably about 90, 95, maybe even more, 95% or even more of that. There's a similarity in mons, and that causes for a lot of people to have this belief that BDSP and DPP are, if not the same thing, two very similar metagames. And that is more towards what this video essay is going to be about today. It's just the main differences in DPP and BDSP. And just as a disclaimer here, most of the topics that I will be covering in this video essay, I will be talking about in terms of the BDSP metagame, much rather than the DPP metagame. And the reasoning for this is that I'm just simply more experienced in the BDSP format than I am in DPP. So I will try to talk as less about DPP as I possibly can. Not because I have anything against it. Quite the opposite. I do think it is quite an intriguing metagame on its own. But it's just not a topic that I myself am super experienced in, and I prefer to talk more about this metagame we have right on your screen right here, Pokemon BDSP. Now, I will try to make some references to get a point or two down, but for the most part, I'm going to be trying to talk on BDSP's basis much more than I do on DPP. So with that all out of the way, let us get started in this grand discussion. Now, what's the first thing that many people would be thinking of in terms of differences between DPP and BDSP, and probably the most obvious is the introduction of the fairy type. And this is a big deal. To say that the fairy type is the only thing that were different about these metagames would cause a huge difference in DPP and BDSP alone. That's changing the core mechanic of Pokemon. And especially when you look at the types that is impacting, most namely the Dragon type, which has, before Generation 6 came around, was pretty much the best type in the game, and it's not even close. I mean, you look at metagames such as, DPP and Black and White, you're looking at trying to enable your dragon as much as you can in order to break into the other team. And the other important type in DPP in Black and White was also the steel type, because it was the only defensive type that could stand up to dragons. And even then, oftentimes, the steel type on its own is not enough to handle the constant barrage of outrages and Draco meteors, because those moves and the mons that had the capabilities to use those moves were just so powerful that it became overbearing for one steel type just to try and hold them off as long as they can. And we look at BDSP here and the introduction of the fairy type, and all of a sudden you don't really see the dragon's type is still good, but it doesn't take on. It's not a free dragon type click anymore, like it was in earlier iterations of these metagames, such as Black and White and DPP, where you can't simply just click outrage and watch something die. You have to be more. Granted, outrage is still a decent stab move in its own right, but you have to be way more considerate of it. You have to, because if you get a outrage kill your Garchomp, then Clefable can come in or Togekiss can come in, and you're probably losing your Garchomp for the rest of the game because you're locked into outrage, and there's no, you're trading your Garchomp for something that's probably way less valuable. You're trading your, well, I don't want to say Latias because Draco isn't a move that locks you in, but I think Garchomp is still in itself a good example. You don't want to simply you don't want to have a one-on-one trade with your Garchomp, clicking outrage. You want to have something that's more like a one-on, trade a Garchomp for two of their mons, or chip on something else, like a kill and a chip on something else. And having the fairy type, even the fairy type as a consideration makes Garchomp more wary to even run outrage as the move. Oftentimes in BDSP, you don't even see, mons such as Garchomp run outrage. Salamence doesn't even run outrage. It actually runs bulkier sets. Dragonite, I guess, another good example. It has to be way more cautious about setting up with the use of its multi-skill, because if there's a clef in the back, it can easily take it on with its unaware. That's also another factor I will be talking about later in the video. But mons such as Garchomp and Dragonite, if they're running outrage, you have to be way more cautious with it. And if they do click on outrage, then you have to consider the clef in the back or the Togekiss in the back. That's oftentimes there, and the player using them has to consider, okay, do I want to let go of my dragon now? Is this a proper point in the game where not having my Garchomp or my Dragonite or whatever it may be, does that harm me in the future? So having the fairy type in its own, that's a huge addition to the BDSP metagame that I think a lot of people, they take notice of it, don't get me wrong, but I think they kind of undervalued it in that way, where Garchomp, oftentimes, I think you just thought there, it's running Dragon Claw instead of Outrage, so it doesn't completely lock itself in to that 2 to 3 turns. And Salamence has its entire role flipped completely on the other side of its head, where instead of being a physical breaker, it now has to resort to defensive shenanigans with Roost, and it's oftentimes running 2 or 3 special attacks instead of because it has better special stab in comparison to its physical counterparts in terms of the BDSP metagame. But yeah, a mon such as Salamence has its entire role flipped on the other side of his head. Not that like it's normal bandit or scarf sets don't necessarily work. They're just far less efficient than they would be in a DPP setting. Uh, Speaking of steel types, there's also the nerf of the steel types. The other type I was talking about that was pretty big in the DPP metagame. Um, the steel type was nerfed as well in Gen 6. Now no longer having its resistance to the ghost type as well as the dark type. And I think the ghost type is much more apparent in this metagame. Although, I mean, the dark type has also gained its benefits. Most notably, Weavile now having near unresistible stab throughout the metagame. And, you look at the... If you were to take a look at the metagame, if you were to take a look at Weavile, now with the steel type no longer having the ability to resist its dark type stab, you look at mons such as, in this matchup, you see mons such as Magnezone and Scizor, who now no longer can come in on Weavile's dark type stab as well. Crawdaunt, which is used as a breaker in this metagame, neither Zone nor Scizor can come in on that all that well. Matter of fact, if Scizor doesn't have any investment in speed, which it oftentimes doesn't, Crawdaunt oftentimes ends up threatening it. Weavile, can threaten the 2-hit KO Scizor if the conditions are right. And, on the Ghost type side, this nerf has ended up pretty much causing the ban of Gengar, because as I previously mentioned, these mons, Zone, Scizor, Heatran is a big one. Those mons can't resist Gengar's Shadow Ball at all. And that has, earlier on in the metagame, even mons such as the famous Spadef Wall in Blissey had to run Shadow Ball in order to have a chance against Gengar. And I think that in itself just, it just kind of puts into perspective how stupid Gengar was in the earlier on the BDSP metagame that eventually led on to its ban. And later on down the road, this improvement upon the ghost type has also caused mons such as Miss Magius to become OU well, it's not OU proper yet, but it probably will end up becoming OU proper. And you look at a mon such as Miss Magius, and I mean, not to say that its stats are outright bad, but they're not stats that you would necessarily expect to see out of an OU Pokemon, especially one that doesn't have, Levitate's good, but it's not a stellar ability that's making your eyes pop out of your skull or something like that. But even then, Miss Magius is more than capable of holding its own in an OU metagame, just because the Steel type no longer has the ability to resist this Shadow Ball, which is by far Miss Magius's best asset in this metagame. Whereas previously before in, a metagame such as DPP, Miss Magius, I mean, I think it's QU in DPP, but it wouldn't be able to hold its own nearly as well as it would in this sort of environment, where if you look at the VDR for BDSP, and you just look at the mons that a lot of teams are likely going to be using, you tend to notice that a lot of mons don't actually switch into Miss Magius spell at all. There's the two dark types I mentioned, Crawdaunt and Weavile. Neither of them want to switch into Miss Magius' coverage moves, and the only real great answer is Blissey, which is, if you're running Blissey, you're probably running something more fat, so that, Blissey gives up a lot of momentum. And, you look at the main Spadef pivots, Rotom Wash can't heal it. Rotom Wash can only heal through leftovers. Heatran can only heal through leftovers. Mew is weak to Ghost. Celebi's weak to Ghost. And those are some of the more common pivots that you see on like more offensive teams. And those would be like your especially defensive answers. And Miss Magnus just tears through them. Like it's not even up for debate. You can click Shadow Ball and not really have much of a second thought about it. And that is mainly in thanks due to the fact that the Steel type can't resist Miss Magnus' Shadow Balls, as I first mentioned. So without going too far off onto a tangent here, I will get to my next topic, which is the team preview. And I think this is also another big factor. Probably would be the second thing that a lot of people would bring up in the differences between BDSP and DPP, but it's still a pretty big difference. I mean, when you look at BDSP and probably the number one mon in the metagame, Scizor, I think even just like taking a small sample size of how it's typically been used. Let's say you're using a Scizor uh, early on to a BDSP game where there is no team preview at all, and you find yourself face to face with let's say you switched into Scizor onto a Choice Specs Latias Psychic, you know, um, so you switch in Scizor, you take like I don't know, I think it's like 40 or something like that, maybe a little bit less than that. So now naturally, the Latias is locked into Psychic, not really worried about another Psychic because you can easily roost it off. But now you got to worry about what's behind the Latias, right? And you got several moves you can go for. So let's say in this scenario you go for U-turn, right? Well, if you go for U-turn, then there's the possibility that and in this scenario your Scizor is ST, your wing con on the team, and so let's say you U-turn. Well, a Heatran could possibly come in, and you could get burned, and all of a sudden your wing con, very early on into the game, might I add, has been crippled permanently throughout the game, unless if you're like the one team that's running like an aromatherapy Clefable, but that's besides the point. Your Scizor's burned, and your chances of winning have gone down drastically throughout the first 5 or so turns of the game. And it's not I mean, you could have possibly played around it, but how are you to know for sure that a Heatran was there? And let's say, okay, well, I don't want to get burned by Heatran, so I'm going to take this turn to roost because obviously this Latias is pretty threatening. Choice Specs is pretty powerful in its own right. So let's get a roost off. Scout to see if the Heatran does in fact come in, and if the Heatran comes in, then no big deal. I have that information now. So you decide to roost, and Magnezone comes in. Well, now your Scizor is done for because it is trapped by Magdipole, and once again, your win con is down the drain. Now, for the most part, if you do see a Latias, you're probably not going to see both Mons, which is why having team preview in the first place in BDSP, I believe, is so impactful, because now you can see, oh well, there's a Heatran in the back, I should probably just roost. Or on the contrary, oh, there's a Magnezone in the back, I gotta be cautious, I should probably either double here or U-turn out. One of those two plays. And that changes how you play the game. Just in that one scenario, you now have eliminated one of those other two options that would otherwise harm you if you. I'm getting jumbled on my words here, but I hope my point has been made on regarding team preview and how it can impact how someone plays the game. That was just an early game example, and I'm sure there's more to think about while you're getting into the mid game. That's just my point regarding team preview, and that was just an example that came up into my head while thinking about this topic. The next big topic I want to talk about, more so like on the move pool side. I'll probably be, firing things off here and there as I discuss this topic. And, obviously a big thing in BDSP has been that a plethora of moves, that were available in Sword and Shield, as a matter of fact, not necessarily towards DPP, although there were some differences in even the BDSP move pools in comparison to DPP. Regardless, I am digressing a little bit. But the BDSP move pools were, to put it in a very nice way, relatively quirky. And, obviously I think the most famous example is that Jirachi, the DPP Titan, no longer has access to its, I wouldn't say signature, but it doesn't have access to Ironhead anymore. And that has caused, that's been one of the many reasons why its viability in the BDSP metagame has fallen off drastically. No longer does it have the ability to simply flinch past its opponents with high-speed scarf sets, and it has U-turn now, so it probably it has U-turn, so even if there were to be something annoying towards Ironhead, it's not a possibility anymore, is what I'm trying to get at. Jirachi does not have Ironhead. Zapdos and Magnezone have pretty much lost a majority of their moves that are related to their stab. Zapdos infamously can't hit grounds at all, which has made BDSP OU Zapdos one of its worst gens. Now, I don't want to say this in the wrong way and give off this impression that Zapdos in BDSP is absolutely terrible, because then I would be making this video in bad faith. I don't want to say that in terms of, Zapdos is bad, but Zapdos is definitely not the mon it could have been. It's still decent. It's still definitely viable in the BDSP metagame, but it's definitely far off of what it could have been had it had, access to moves such as Hurricane, or, a move I'm going to talk about a little bit more later in, like, Hidden Power. And, Zapdos does not have those options, which has limited it somewhat in the BDSP metagame. Well, it's limited a lot in the BDSP metagame, but as I previously mentioned, it's still definitely useful, just not at its best. And, in terms of Magnezone, pretty much anything that, Magnezone, you pretty much always have 3 moves on it. That's just how bad its move pool is. Every single Magnezone you ever see in this metagame will have Thunderbolt, Volt Switch, and Flash Cannon, and that last move can be a complete crapshoot. You can run, a lot of people like to run Tri-Attack. Some people have liked to run a third electric move in that last slot, whether it be Thunder or Discharge. Me, myself, personally, I like to run Sleep Talk in a lot of my Magnezones, which enables Magnezone to come in on mons such as like Roserade, mainly Roserade. A lot more cleaner, since Magnezone wouldn't care about Sleep then. And I think that example kind of shows off the uniqueness that BDSP can have, in that you can afford to run more niche moves that you wouldn't really see in any other serious metagame. You know, the moves such as Sleep Talk, as I mentioned, as well as Copycat, and those are just two examples I can think off the top of my head. But those two moves have been used in more serious games, and those two, I mean, Sleep Talk, I guess like on curse sets, but like on choice sets, usually don't see a move such as Sleep Talk get used unless if you know for sure that like a Spore Mon or a Sleep Powder Mon is being brought, or in terms of Copycat, when are you ever really going to see Copycat in a much more serious metagame? That would be in other metagames that would probably be close to balance for throwing. In BDSP, I mean, mons such as Azumarill, as an example, can run Copycat, since Superpower isn't amazing for Azumarill to run. It doesn't really hit a whole lot that its Waters and Fairy Stab doesn't already hit. I guess mainly like if you really wanted to hit Magnezone, although you already do a lot of damage to Magnezone and you're already slower anyways. But yeah, that makes it so that moves such as Copycat can be ran on Choice Band Azumarill sets. And I think that's what makes BDSP kind of a cool metagame, is that, yeah, the move pools are atrocious. I don't think anyone's going to realistically argue with that. But having, these kind of far out techs can definitely be something that's pretty cool to have in a metagame, and I think BDSP does offer a little bit of that from time to time. And now I'm going to talk about what I previously alluded to earlier. There is no hidden power whatsoever in this game, similarly to how it works in Sword and Shield. And this is also a pretty big deal. I mean, when you look at, some of the top mons in the BDSP metagame, you see Gliscor, which has a 4x weakness to ice. Garchomp has a 4x weakness to ice. Scizor has a 4x weakness to fire. Heatran has a 4x weakness to ground. All of those mons would hate seeing, a move such as Hidden Power in this metagame. You look at a mon, Roserade has a pretty respectable special attack stat, but yet Roserade will never have the opportunity to run offensive sets all that well, because every time, you try to bring an offensive Roserade, you have the more than, you have a very realistic chance, and probably almost guaranteed, that you're going to end up encountering one of Scizor or Heatran, if not both. And those two mons shut down any sort of attempt of an offensive Roserade almost immediately. Like, what is an offensive Roserade going to do to, those two mons if it doesn't have access to hidden power? You can't do anything to either of those two, in a matter of fact. The most it can do is, maybe try to set a spike on Switch. But then that just makes Roserade a spiking merchant, and you're not really utilizing anything offensive at all. Roserade has hidden power in this meta, and all of a sudden, you're a lot more concerned about switching Scizor or Heatran on the off chance that the Roserade is packing hidden power fire or hidden power ground, one of the two. Zapdos and Magnezone, as I alluded to earlier. Magnezone to run hidden power ice just about, probably not every time, although damn near every time. There would probably still be like the offshoot, off meta, Tri Attack or Sleep Talk, as I mentioned. But Magnezone would have hidden power ice almost every single time, and Zapdos would probably have hidden power ice probably about every single time. And hidden power allows for a lot of these mons to open themselves up and well, not just open themselves up, but open up their teammates by getting a hidden power play right. And without hidden power being the metagame at all, it makes a lot of these switches just a lot more safer. If you have a sleep stack already, if you have a mon that's already been sleep stacked to Roserade, a Scissor and Heatran, all of a sudden it just becomes that much more safer. Gliscor coming in on Heatran, you never have to worry about Heatran, suddenly having hidden power ice and just absolutely demolishing your Gliscor. Your Gliscor is pretty safe to come in on Heatran, assuming that it's a normal Gliscor that's faster and has special defensive pull. So even without the use of hidden power, these plays become a lot more safer, I would say. Now that doesn't make BDSP easier necessarily, but it makes the plays safer. And another thing that I'm going to talk about that's probably going to lead into one mon in particular is BDSP, similarly to Sword and Shield, once again, has no pursuit. And I think the biggest one that shows off this lack of pursuit is, well, Tyranitar, who, similarly to Jirachi, has fallen off big time. And I think it's Tyranitar has fallen off due to a multiple of reasons. One of which being obviously, as I mentioned, pursuit. It can no longer trap mons such as Starmie. It can't trap Latias. It can't trap Zam, although trapping Zam is kind of a risky business, but you can't trap Zam. You can't trap Mew. So I mean, those are just some of the mons you can't really trap. Although you can't trap Celebi. I mean, those are psychic types that, as someone using Tyranitar, you'd want to take advantage of, and that's not possible to do. And that's without mentioning the other uses that pursuit gives Tyranitar, such as revenge killing, mons that are relatively weakened, that have been relatively weakened throughout the game, yada yada yada. So yeah, Tyranitar doesn't have pursuit, which doesn't allow it to take on those more offensive psychics, even the bulkier psychics that want to keep their HP. And another factor is that Tyranitar doesn't have permanent sand, and that's pretty big too, since I think that's probably about as meta-defining as anything. And if Tyranitar had permanent sand, then everything in the metagame would probably also have to cater to, well, now I'm probably seeing Tyranitar, even if it's something such as like 1 every 10 games, well, I have to keep an account for, that potential sandstorm chip. But since it's going to last the entire game, and more likely than not, I'm not going to have something that's able to set up weather and just get rid of that sand. But without permanent sand, well, now I can just try to weather the storm 4 or 5 turns, because Tyranitar's not going to have it's not going to have smooth rock. So I can just try to weather the sand for no pun intended. Weather the sand for 5 turns, and all of a sudden everything's fine again. And if the Tyranitar is dead, then congrats, you don't have to deal with the sand anymore. And I think no one really looks onto this, but I think a mon that's benefited greatly from this is probably one of the better mons in the game, probably even a top 10 mon in BDSP, Whereas in DPP, I think it's falling lower towards the C ranks even. I could be wrong in that. It might be just like a low B minus. But Infernate, a mon that even in BDSP terms is well known for dying relatively quickly. And speaking of dying relatively quickly, Staraptor is also definitely another mon that benefits from this. And, that mostly comes from the fact that both of their hard-hitting breaking moves, Flare Blitz for Infernate and Brave Bird for Staraptor, both cause massive amounts of recoil that, limit how long the mon is able to stay on the field. And, when you take into account all that stand chip that it's going to be taking in DPP, that just makes it so the mon, isn't as valuable to use. And, in BDSP, you get, if it comes in one time, you're saving 6% in comparison to DPP. Comes in twice, you're saving 12%, 3 times, 18%. And it starts to tally on, and now you're seeing Infernate get more and more of these opportunities to break through the team, and that's where Infernate and Staraptor are beginning to get more of their viability from in BDSP. Is just having that little bit more of extra time to break down the opposing team. So yeah, when those breakers have more time, and that's just in a more exaggerated sense. That's not to take anything away from literally anything else that isn't that's taking chip from sand. Those non-rock, ground, and steel types. Those bonds also definitely appreciate sand not being omnipresent. Clefable definitely appreciates the lack of sand, since it's pretty much, tasked with taking on a lot of the opponent's teams. As I mentioned earlier, Clefable's pretty much, aside from Togekiss, it's the premier counter to Garchomp, and it comes in on a lot of things. And, would that be possible if Clefable, who, usually is running unaware, because without running unaware, SD Chomp can definitely break past it with hazards. But so, if Clefable's forced to run unaware, can Clefable really take on everything that it wants to with stand up? Probably not. It's probably faltering to a lot of things it wants to take on, just because it doesn't get that it doesn't get its leftovers recovery that it really wants. Especially with it running protect stats, because BDSP move pools, Clefable doesn't get any 16 other. It doesn't get any other 16 PP. It doesn't get any other 16 PP healing moves. And even its only other recovery options Moonlight anyways, which would also consequentially be hindered by sand, so it would probably run rich anyways. But once again, I digress. Clefable would definitely not be able to take on as much as it would want to if Tyranitar and Sand were to be omnipresent, which it obviously isn't. Other weather abilities also don't last forever. So hooray, Rain isn't a complete mess. Anyone who is familiar with BDSP today, and I'm sure a lot of you are that are probably watching this video, more so like a more specific audience, but those who are familiar with the metagame are definitely thankful for the fact that Rain is not lasting forever, because God, that would be terrible. Some moves also got a buff in the, what's going on here? Alright, okay, there we go, we're back. So some moves got buffed, and some moves such as the Fog got buffed, where it now removes hazards. Knockoff got buffed from 20 BP to 65 BP with the option of getting buffed to 97.5 if Knockoff removes the item, as well as Rapid Spin. But I mean, it's a nice buff. Don't get me wrong, but Rapid Spin. It's not that Rapid Spin's bad, obviously, but the mods that have it are just terrible. Aside from Starmie, Dawn Fen is a meme. Fortress is also not that great. So I mean, while Rapid Spin was buffed, I wouldn't say it's as huge as the other two. Knockoff, obviously, giving Crawdon the ability to destroy balanced teams much more than it already did. And it also gives tank growth a little bit of oomph behind it. And, well, I mean, I guess this is what's... Gliscor as well, also getting a little bit more oomph behind its knockoffs instead of just being a very stagnant move that doesn't really do anything other than removing the item. And I think Defog, out of all these moves, has probably been the biggest buff since, as I previously mentioned, the Rapid Spinners outside of Starmie aren't really all that amazing, which oftentimes leads to a lot of teams, such as the team that I'm running here. A lot of them oftentimes have to run Defog as their method of hazard removal. And I would say overall, obviously, the Defoggers in this metagame are far superior to the Rapid Spinners, since oftentimes the Defoggers you're running in this metagame, you don't really have to hinder a slot purely towards the hazard removal. The mod can actually do other things that actually fit its own role, that actually justify running the mod in the first place, not just, oh, I need a mod that removes hazards. The mod actually does other things that contribute to the team. Such mods include Scizor, Mew, Gliscor, other mods. I mean, Starmie doesn't really run Defog, but those three, all great mons in their own right. And, you know, defensive Scizor it's pretty much one of the better checks you can have to Weavile. And Gliscor, I mean, if anyone's ever played Violet OU, I don't think I really need to give Gliscor all that much production. Walls off, a fair amount of the metagame, and Mew, that's your special defensive pivot. Can pretty much take on a plethora of special breakers that aren't named Miss Magius, and I'm sure that some people are yelling at me right now for not being able to remember the other super obvious defoggers, but unfortunately at this current time I cannot do so. But I mean, those three defoggers are all pretty great in their own right, and definitely deserve a mention in this video. There's also the nerf of Explosion, both booms, Explosion and Self-Destruct, which obviously means that your special breaker can't surprise Blissey anymore and get a boom off, or even something such as like Abandoned Metagross can't just take out a Mon for free with boom. Those moves no longer have defense, and it just takes the normal defense into calculation. A lot of the higher power moves, such as Flamethrower, Ice Beam, Fire Blast Blizzard, Thunder, vice versa. A lot of those moves got slightly nerfed in the BP department, and the former moves I mentioned, well, they might not be former, but like Flamethrower, Ice Beam, Surf, Thunderbolt. I believe Surf got nerfed. But those moves all got nerfed from 95 to 90, and Fire Blast, Blizzard Thunder, vice versa. Hydro Pump, those moves got nerfed from 120 down to 110. And while we're talking about, well, I was talking about some moves that got buffed, but there are some moves that are new to the metagame, new to, well, a Synodex metagame entirely. Volt Switch, which you've probably seen used, I don't know, probably 20 to 30 times in this video alone. Yeah, that move is pretty good. It enables, Rotom Wash to be annoying. Pretty much one of the more annoying mons you can see in this metagame is a Rotom Wash, just because the defensive sets are just such slow pivots that are able to enable in powerful breakers, and the faster sets can definitely still hit pretty hard with Volt Switch. And I mean, Rotom Wash with Volt Switch, it pretty much doesn't need another. It doesn't need a break-in electric type move. It can just run Volt Switch and get along just fine. A mon such as Mew is able to use Volt Switch in order to get other mons in pretty safely. It challenges the bulky waters that are pretty present in this metagame. Just saw it there. A Rotom Wash my Rotom Wash there slow Volt switched into an Alakazam, and there wasn't really much my opponent could do there to stop Alakazam from taking the kill. So I guess that was just conveniently one example of Volt Switch being used in order to get a mod in, as well as keeping Starmie low. And the other move that's also pretty new that's been used, not as much as Volt Switch, but it's probably been used quite a few times throughout this video, is Scald, which enables the bulky waters, as I was previously mentioning, to be able to burn whatever is trying to come in on them. And I think having Scald in this metagame, it definitely makes an ability such as Roserade or Blissey's Natural Cure or Starmie's Natural Cure a lot more of a plus factor to have. But it definitely makes switching in mons a lot more annoying. Even if the Starmie's defensive, you're not going to bring in, your Weavile and just dark move away. And because Starmie can burn the Weavile, and Starmie can burn Scizor. That's definitely something Scizor has to worry about. But yeah, examples such as those, you're seeing your physical threats have to be a lot more cautious when coming in on, more specifically, these bulky waters that, I think a lot of really good teams tend to have. Starmie and Milotic, just to name a couple of them. I mean, it's not really massive distribution, but the mons that have Scald, Suicune here is a good example. Now you have to deal with, a Suicune that I wouldn't say it's at its prime, but an already really, really annoying mon to face with in Calm Mind Suicune, and now you have Scalds that are able to burn mons that are trying to overpower it on the physical side, and that can definitely get Suicune over the edge on some of the matchups it's trying to be the win con in. So that's another example of how Scald can be pretty impactful in this metagame as well. Sturdy has been buffed, which has given Skarmory the ability to be a suicide lead on some hyper offense teams. Other than that, I don't think it's all that impactful. I mean, Fortress isn't really on, as I previously said. The Rotom appliances, they now all have their own types, and that's a big reason why you haven't really seen much of any other Rotom appliances in this video other than Rotom Wash. Rotom Wash having pump and as well as the water typing, it just makes it far superior from Rotom Mo and Rotom Heat, I guess, are like okay, but they pale in a comparison to Rotom Wash. I mean, you look at Rotom Wash, who has Stab Hydro Pump and Volt Switch, and I was already talking about how, Volt Switch is a pretty damn good move. Well, Volt Switch is a really damn good move on a mon such as Rotom Wash, who now has Hydro Pump Stab, and can blow past all the ground types that initially would want to come in on Volt Switch. You look at the ground types in the metagame, and those are the ones you want to have coming in on Volt Switch. And you look at how they match up with Rotom Wash of Hydro Pump, and unless if you're like Spidef Gliscor against defensive Rotom, none of them really match up all that well. And the only one that matches up that can take a Hydro Pump as well as coming on Volt Switch, which is Garchomp, but it doesn't want to come in on Rotom Wash's other commonly ran move, which is Will-O-Wisp. So, you take those factors into it, and all of a sudden, it's pretty easy to see why Rotom Wash is an A+ mon. And, Rotom Heat and Rotom Mo don't have those factors. Both of their signature moves, as a part of their appliance, Overheat and Leaf Storm. Those don't take on Gliscor as well. Overheat doesn't take on Garchomp well at all. And I mean, they're both fine. Well, Leaf Storm doesn't hit Nidoking super effectively, but Nidoking is overall pretty frail, so I mean, that's not a big problem. But I mean, when you're looking at the grounds, you're mainly looking at Gliscor and Garchomp, and those two moves just pale in comparison against both of those mons, in contrast to Rotom Wash's Hydro Pump. Critical hits overall have been nerfed. Before, in Gen 4, they were a 2x multiplier, and in BDSP, obviously, it is only a 1.5x multiplier. And, that's able to give, both your playstyles, much more of a margin for error. It doesn't seem like all that much until, you look at something that's doing, 30%, and, with, that's, a 3-hit KO, but, all of a sudden, you see something, like a critical hit in Gen 4 would be, 60%. You're doing 35, and now, you're doing 35% on a move, and a crit brings that up to 70. Now all of a sudden, you're at risk of, potentially dying into a normal move, a normal 35% move, into a crit. Whereas and let's just assume that, you have recover, so taking 35% isn't all that big of a deal. Like in BDSP, you get crit, and, you're still probably relatively fine. You have to have pretty bad luck and get crit twice in order to lose that exchange. So that just gives both your teams much more of a way out, and a way to properly establish themselves in this metagame in comparison to something like DPP. Not to say that DPP doesn't allow for fatter playstyles to be used, but this difference definitely helps both your playstyles, is what I'm trying to get at. Soul Duo has been nerfed. That is probably the main reason why Latias is even in the metagame in the first place. If Latias were to have effectively choice specs, Draco Meteors, and Psychic still, even with the inclusion of the Fairy type, it would still probably be relatively overbearing, since it still has, access to Calm Mind then. Choice Specs Latias already hits hard enough, but its ultimate downfall is that it can't recover at all unless it were to get a wish, like its own Clefable or something along the lines of that. And something less important, it's more of like a meme option. Mail isn't in BDSP, so if you were unaware, out of the loop, mail can be used as an anti-trick tech to prevent Rotom Wash from tricking certain mons, such as like Blissey, for example. Blissey can no longer run. Blissey can't run mail or anything else that would hate to have a scarf given to it. So on the contrary of my last point, this definitely hurts more bulkier playstyles the most, but overall, I mean, it would be pretty niche, so I'm not gonna talk too long about this. And then probably the last one of the last big points. There's definitely still some that are important that are still left. Hidden abilities are in BDSP. Obviously in DPP, it was released before Gen 5, so hidden abilities weren't available then, but they are now here in BDSP. And just to list off a few examples, Zam having access to Magic Guard, allowing for it to not take any hazard damage, being a good spike stack check, as well as keeping it out of range of some priority moves that would otherwise pull it from, even something such as like 70 or 80%. That can rack up throughout a game. Breloom having access to Technician, now it's able to run SP, Bullet Seed, and Mach Punch sets. As I mentioned before, Clefable having Unaware is huge, and it basically allows for it to become the defensive backbone on a lot of teams in the metagame, since it pretty much nullifies a lot of setup mons that would threaten these defensive backbones otherwise. D9 getting multi-scale, allowing for it to have a lot more D-dance opportunities should it choose to run it. Banned otherwise is also pretty good, and even on banned sets, you have no rocks, and you can take that extra hit that you might not initially be able to take. Gator having sheer force pretty much caused for it to rise up to OU. I'd say for the most part, Gator is still pretty. It's not a more niche side. I mean, I wouldn't say niche. It's still decent. It's still alright. But sheer force definitely helped it climb up to OU. Garchomp having rough skin, pretty much aside from Heatran's Flame Body and Zapdos' Static. Heatran's Flame Body also being another big BDSP meta-defying trait for Heatran, in that it can burn Scizor, as well as potentially eliminating some win cons, even something such as like Lucario, which obviously Lucario takes out Heatran, but if Heatran's able to get off a burn, that's potentially a win that Heatran players taken away from Lucario. As I was saying, other than Flame Body and Static, Rough Skin's the only way you're really able to punish Scizor's U-turn, or any other mon's U-turn for that part. Let's see here. Yes, Nidoking also getting sheer force. That also caused for Nidoking to become rather viable in BDSP, and nothing is really able to come in on Nidoking. If you play Nidoking, as long as you're able to play Nidoking rather well, which oftentimes can be pretty hard to do, but a well-played Nidoking is definitely one of the more scary things you can see in the metagame. Sheer force boosted Sludge Waves and Earth Powers definitely take on a vast majority of the metagame, namely Clef. Having the ability to force Clef out is great for Nidoking, and with Ice Beam the boot to take on a potential switch in Glasgow, and all of a sudden you have a very threatening wall breaker even though obviously special attack isn't Needle King's thing, but sheer force definitely enables it to do such a thing. Staraptor having reckless, as I, further giving it the ability to break through walls and just be a complete pain in the butt for both teams, even offense teams. Basically makes Staraptor a hydrogen bomb in the metagame. Offensive Starmie having Analytic. Analytic has made Starmie one of the more threatening mons for quite a long time. Throughout 2024, a lot of people were trying to figure out how to deal with Starmie and, Life Orb Analytic, and people in the community had to come up with relatively creative ways. Life Orb Starmie made the way for defensive Mew, which I said a couple times throughout the video, and even a mon such as Gastrodon, whose water absorb was buffed in this. Well, it was buffed after Gen 4, but obviously in Gen 4, water absorb only increased your special attack. You didn't get the water type immunity. And BDSP, obviously, you get that water type immunity. Tangrowth getting access to Regenerator, which basically made it one of the best defensive pivots in the game, especially on balanced teams, being able to take on several physical moves in the metagame, such as non-Fire Blast Chomp, something such as Lucario, or it can annoy Scizor from time to time. Just having Tangrowth in that spot definitely. I'm saying this wrong, but having Tangrowth having Regenerator definitely helps it. And I can't believe I almost forgot this. It's able to take on Crawdon. It's pretty much the Crawdon answer, and it doesn't have to run an item because Regenerator pretty much, Tangrowth not running an item allows for it to take on Crawdon, and obviously Tangrowth would like to run an item. But ultimately for Tangrowth, it's not the end of the world because it ends up gaining so much from Regenerator anyways. And Game Freak, if you're listening, please nerf this for Gen 10. Please nerf Regen for Gen 10. But anyways, I'm going off on a tangent once again. I think for the most part, that would be it for the hidden ability section. Once again, might be leaving out a couple mons, but overall, I think the point I've been trying to make has been made. There's also the nerf of Burn and Paralysis, where Burn no longer takes 1/8, I believe. It was 1/8. Now it's only a 16th. Obviously, a big difference there. And the odds of, or maybe it was how slow a mon was, I believe, at the paralysis. Like that. I don't exactly remember the paralysis nerf, but I do fully recall how the paralysis nerf it was implemented. I believe it went from a 4 to a half. I'm getting like Mandela effect or something like that, but yeah, paralysis was also nerfed as well. And then last but not least, the reduced distribution of Toxic as a move. And this one is also, a lot of the mons in the beta game, if you've been paying attention, quite a bit of them have been steel types, so they're not really concerned about Toxic in the first place. But even something like Clefable, I guess, is another big example. Everything in BDSP comes back to Clefable. But, think about how concerned Clefable would be on coming in on a lot of mons in a universal Toxic metagame. Clefable would probably be forced to run Magic Guard, as it has for quite a while. And that just basically enables Chomp to do whatever it pleases. Something like Togekiss would hate getting toxic. Um, it oftentimes relies on, just how fat it is, and with its decent enough speed here in the metagame, and being able to T-wave everything in sight or flinch everything in sight. But if that were to be toxic, then that would also be pretty catastrophic for it as well, as it's no longer able to either take the hits it wants or be able to annoy everything with Air Slash as much as it would want to. Suicune's another one that would definitely hate toxic. Milo as well, even though Milo gets the defensive boost with Marva Scale, it's no longer able to. Milotic's pretty famous in the game for doing a lot of nothing, but it's going to be forced to have to do something if it has a toxic timer on it. Same thing with Suicune. Suicune gets toxic, then all of a sudden, it's on a pretty limited timer to win the game. And the clerics in the metagame aren't super available. I mean, there's Clefable and Blissey, but those two mons, for the most part, want to be able to run their own moves, and would prefer to not be forced to run something else. And even mons that I haven't mentioned, even something like Rotom Wash would not like toxic at all. Rotom Wash would hate toxic since it can't really heal at all. But as I was getting at, even the mons I haven't mentioned, a lot of them probably don't want to get toxic at all, even if there's something, like a physical threat like Garchomp or a Zumbrel even. Like, it's not the end of the world if those mons get toxic. Garchomp would definitely hate it. But overall, like, do those mons want to be toxic? Not really. And, just having that be a different factor would definitely shake up the metagame as well. So I guess this is, for the most part, the end of this video essay I have here. If anything that I have said throughout this video has shown, if anything I've said that regarding the BDSP metagame has given you some sort of intrigue as to what BDSP is as a metagame even more, I'm going to link the Discord down below. You can join that. There's other great players in the Discord that are more than willing to help out. And I just want to leave off on a final message, and that is that overall, it is understandable to see why a lot of people would assume that these two metagames are so similar, but I do think it's important to take the metagame, not for what it is, but like it's important to really evaluate how like these differences in like the fairy type, like how it's important to analyze just how the fairy type impacts the entire metagame as a whole. It's not just that the type itself exists, but how does that impact everything, the entire environment around it. And I think that's what's ultimately important on what to analyze here, and why this video was made. Just how these different factors all led to BDSP, who, despite having damn near the exact same mons that DPP had, ends up being almost a completely different environment in comparison to DPP. So, with that, I'm going to sign off here, and if there is a next time, I hope to see you guys then. And goodbye.